Good afternoon. So one of the big psychological issues of our time is the appropriate place for logos. And that has been raised by Professor Jordan Peterson, among others. And of course, we have Christians selling the Bible as the word and therefore logos. And so claiming that we need to stick with logos. But that's not right. And Dr. Jung clearly points this out in paragraph 621 of Answer to Job, where he points out that, well, first of all, let me say that Dr. Jung said that the tendency of men is to seek perfection, and the tendency of women is to seek relatedness. And what Dr. Jung said in paragraph 621 is that a perfectionist intention excludes the kind of relatedness that we know as eros. And the lack of eros, of relationship to values, is painfully apparent in the book of Job. And so then he goes on to say, the paragon of creation, therefore perfection, according to Dr. Jung, he's talking about Yahweh here. The paragon of creation is not a man, but a monster. And what that means is that pure logos creates a monster, and it doesn't allow for relatedness. And we can see that regularly on our Thanksgiving dinner, when the men all want to go out and just go blotto drinking beer and watching an NFL football game, while the women are all relating and cooking dinner. And so one piece of advice for young men would be that you should learn to carve at least, because all your discernment in your logos should make it so that you can contribute to the Thanksgiving dinner by carving. But one of the things that I've noted on this YouTube channel is about 95% of the viewers are young men between 18 and 44. And the fact that you're spending a lot of time watching videos suggests that maybe you don't have enough interaction or enough relatedness with women in your lives. And so today I'm going to offer a suggestion, and let me refer back to the logos issue. If you want to impress a woman that you're interested in, you can't go up to her all logical and rational and say, these are the reasons why you should marry me. She'll say, huh? And you know, I guess it works if you're a billionaire and the woman you're interested in is a beautiful gold digger, then yes, then you'll get the woman of your dreams. And the question is, will the billionaire stick with you after your beauty disintegrates a little? You better learn if you're a woman. And so you have to establish a way of having relatedness with the women in your life. And so one of the important ways that you can establish relatedness, one of the important ways you can establish relatedness is through poetry. You can't go up to a woman and say, these are the reasons why I'm the best pick, because somehow she's going to have to understand what kind of a father you will be, what kind of a provider you will be when your children are growing up, and that sort of thing. And this even happens in the animal world, where the osprey in my neighborhood, for example, have to show off. They have to do three things to get a female's attention. And ospreys typically mate for life if they can, but the three things that they have to do are they have to build a nest, they have to do a kind of dance in the air with a female to get her attention, and then they have to bring her a fish, which shows that he will provide for her while she's sitting on the eggs and after the chicks hatch. And human beings are not much different from that, actually, although we're quite a bit more complicated. So 25 years ago, I wrote a series of poems on the art of seduction. And originally, I was going to publish it as with the name The Seduction. But I mentioned this in a bookstore in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., to a young man who happened to be an Indian American. And he said, "Oh, you can't just say The Seduction. You have to, everybody's talking about the soul right now, so you have to say Seduction for the soul." And so that is the origin. That's where the name Seduction for the Soul for this book came out. And I think there's about 50 poems in this book that are all on the topic of the seduction. And these are all ways, these poems are all ways of showing typically a woman you're interested in, that you're not all logos. And mind you, logos is, perfection in logos is important to us in many ways. For example, when I'm driving down the road this morning, I realized that I am entirely dependent upon the principle of perfection in my automobile. And that goes for every single one of the thousands of parts in my automobile. I expect them to be perfect, because only if they're perfect will my car drive properly and not have to have maintenance all the time. So there is a place for perfection in our life, but in order to get a life, you need to have a relationship with a life partner, and that is not a function of perfection only. We need a balance between these two. And so what I'm offering today is 3 poems on how to get the attention of a woman who will be an interesting partner for you. Now, mind you, there are uses and abuses of poetry. If you're seeking a mate initially, these can be very powerful. But if you use it to find a lover and to cheat on your wife, then you are going to find the dark side of getting a life. And the dark side has many elements to it, but I won't go into that today. I'll let you use your imagination. But these 3 poems are about how to attract a woman's attention. And so the first poem is called Symphony. Now, all 3 of these poems, or 2 of the first 2 poems, are villanelles. And in a villanelle, there's a specific form. It's not a sonnet, it's a different form. Villanelle actually is a kind of song in French. And so in this form, the first and third lines are the guts of the poem, and there are 6 verses to the poem. The first 5 verses are 3 lines long, and the 6th verse is 4 lines long. And the first and third lines are repeated alternately through the poem. And so this is the first of them. Symphony. I want to play you like a symphony. Draw a rosin bow across your silken breast with driving rhythms from the timpani. I'll guide you far from life's cacophony to hidden valleys, Mozart's sweet bequest. I want to play you like a symphony. Molten cello will conjure sylvan sea before brash cymbals bring the waves to crest, with driving rhythms from the timpani. Oboes kiss the brass with breath so gently that woodwinds whisper lovers' firm request. I want to play you like a symphony, until our tension passes middle C, just one crescendo freeze, life's hurts redressed, with driving rhythms from the timpani. Warm string vibrations guide infinity across our honeysuckle minds abreast. I want to play you like a symphony, with driving rhythms from the timpani. Okay, so that was the first one, and let's should have put that up earlier. And so it takes only 1 minute to recite that poem, and you know, if you want to get to know a girl, you might say, do you like poetry? And if she says yes, you say, can I read a poem to you? You don't have to say it's my poem. You can say whatever you like about it. And if you're successful, then you might get Symphony's reply. Now, this would be where you would suggest to the young woman that she read this poem to you. And so here you go. Just be careful with this stuff. It's dynamite. Okay, Symphony's reply. Conduct me firmly like a symphony. Draw a heart to breast through fluid rosin bow, with driving rhythms from the timpani. Guide spirits far from life's cacophony. At meadow's edge I'll be a supple doe. Conduct me firmly like a symphony. Baton away the bitter cresting sea from sultry baton away the bitter cresting sea. From sultry cellos molten rivers flow with driving rhythms from the timpani. You steal my breath with one flute melody, warm fabric of a piece your woodwinds sow. Conduct me firmly like a symphony. Strings tantalize my mind with ecstasy. Your beat upon my heart guides me to grow, with driving rhythms from the timpani. Your spirit in the music pulls me free, to smash bright cymbals, letting bodies glow. Conduct me firmly like a symphony, with driving rhythms from the timpani. Okay, so that's the second one. And just to mention a couple of things before I read the third one, and that is that if you haven't joined our Dropbox, you can send an email to skip.conover@gmail.com, and you will have access to a world of things that you don't imagine. And I will add you to our Dropbox. Now, the third of these poems, as you know, in Dr. Jung's oeuvre, archetype is extremely important. And in dreams, we frequently dream about archetypal drama. So knowing that, and knowing that I was writing this series of poems, I purchased a book in 1993 by Clarissa Pinkola Estes called, What Women Dream, or something like that, because I knew that if I could write poetry that would address what women dream, I would be able to get their attention. And so I had read this book, and I also had been doing a fair amount of poetry. So there came a time in March, I believe, of 1993, when I was invited to do a poetry reading at the Martin Luther King Library in downtown Washington, D.C. Now, I thought that was going to be a terrific opportunity to have my poetry heard, which it was, and it provided this interesting story, because I thought I was writing poetry to get the attention of women. And so when I had just finished this book, and let me finish the story about Martin Luther King Library. So on the day, it turned out that the reading was in the front lobby of the library, and there were chairs set out, and it turned out it was still cold in March, and so it turned out that most of the audience were indigent black men, homeless men, who had come in from the cold and were using the opportunity at lunchtime to get warm, and so they sat down in the 50 or 60 chairs that were there in the Martin Luther King Library. And so I read many poems, but of all the poems, this is the only one that they asked me to read a second time. And so when I read it, because I saw that my audience was largely black, I changed the color of the horse from white to black. But other than that, I read this poem exactly as I wrote it. And when I wrote it, which was the night before this reading, I had just completed reading Dr. Estes's book on things women dream. And so this poem just popped out of my head in about 45 minutes the night before this reading. It's called The Whale and the Horse. I dreamed I was a mighty whale, and you a majestic white horse, who lived on an arid plain so stale you couldn't find love's source. My habitat was a blue-green cove where I often swam and dove, and though our forms were sealed by fate, we found we could communicate. You often came to a cliff edge where you could see me swim. You found a path beyond the ledge where you followed your precious whim, to step gingerly down the path, through thorns to my white sand beach, where you could touch my warm, moist bath, allowing me to teach of joys of life and joys of love from many years ago, beyond the strife of thorns above, in precious realms below. But when I looked at your foreleg, I saw a bloody stream of bright red ooze from thorny peg, nightmare within a dream. I bade you join my moist, warm pleasure, but you couldn't stand the sting. I gave the secret of my treasure, the balm for which men sing. Your hooves dug deep, you wouldn't weep. You found my amber ball. You stove it in, released within, the vapor raised the pall. Now free to run and have some fun, you galloped in the surf. You ducked your head into the foam, then dove into my turf. We swam and dove inside my cove until on one deep dive, we surfaced for breath, defeating death, and flew up alive. We flew above your arid plain and dipped our splashing we flew above your arid plain and dripped our splashing waters, and everywhere our bodies dripped, the trees gave birth to daughters. We cavorted nearly every day until the plain was lush, and then returned unto the bay where we found your belly plush, with the fruits of love's wisdom transcending our kingdom of time and space we all know. Our child brought our freedom to fathom the wisdom of leaving life's flow to love's glow. And so that's The Whale and the Horse. And I see I've stunned everyone because there are no comments of those of you that are viewing. The one thing I would say about The Whale and the Horse is that it's basically an alchemical story, because obviously there's no possibility of a whale and a horse ever mating, and moreover not having a child. But the point is that very often we are almost that different from one another in the matches we have in our lives. And the child that comes forth doesn't necessarily have to be a physical child. It could be another kind of creation, the creation of a company, perhaps. I mean, maybe you and a woman of another race are in love with one another, but you think that you can't have any love relationship between you for various reasons. Obviously, these days you can, but maybe you decide that you can't. But there are other things that you can have between you. You can have a love relationship that is very valid and valuable, that involves producing a company or producing something other of value, perhaps starting a nonprofit that helps children, for example. Together, that would be a child also. So in these metaphors, what I've done is reflect for you the kind of relatedness that you need to use if you want to get a woman's attention. So I hope that's useful to you, to my 95% male audience here, and particularly to the 72% of you who are under 35 years old. If you're watching too many YouTube channels, maybe you should learn how to go and get a life, and a life that has relatedness in it as well as perfection. As I said, there are places where we expect perfection. Obviously, we expect it in the automobiles that are built and most of the products that we use. And even in things like gasoline, we don't expect the gasoline to be adulterated. We expect the gasoline to work in our automobile, regardless of whether it's Exxon or Shell. And so gasoline needs to be fungible and made with perfection. But in order to have a life that involves a life partner, you need to step back from that perfection and find the relatedness that is represented by Eros. And so I've been reading from my book, Seduction for the Soul, by David Garrettson, which is my pen name. I hope you enjoyed the reading. And since I see no one chatting here, although there's several of you here, I will stop the stream at this point. Thank you for listening.